This stuff changes by the minute, but the very latest intel that we have in the world of college football right now, this is certainly not a recap show. This is Late Kick Live. It is Thursday night. It is August 13th, and right now it is 7:03 p.m. Central Standard Time. By the time we go off the air, maybe things change. I don't think they will, but we're not going to recap what's happened this week. I think anyone who knows how to find this show probably understands what all's happened this week. Big Ten postponed the season. You could insert the word cancel if you want to. That's kind of what I've chosen to do. The Pac-12, like a child whose father yells across the playground, it's time to go home, follows the Big Ten. They also have postponed their season. And so now we have the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC for now saying, hey, we're in this. And thus far, our medical advisory folks have not told us that we need to cancel the season. And so until they do, we're going to soldier on. So 2 out, 3 still in. I expect it to remain that way for a little while. And we'll have a couple of more hurdles. I'm going to talk about both those in just a second. You guys know, and I don't know how much you were able to hear Sunday night when we discussed it, so I'll kind of reiterate. I've been talking since May about that old 595 rule. I've talked about it so much, I'm tired of listening to me talk about it, so I'm not really going to go down this road a whole lot. But I will say this, for everyone who listened to that and everyone who was tweeting me about it over and over again over the last several months, this was it. This was not just some fancy little saying that we wanted to take as our own. The 595 rule was on full display. The 595 rule is quite simply this. It was readily apparent to anyone who's been paying attention to this nonsense that in a lot of corners of the country, there were precious few people that were either equipped or willing to take stands and make decisions who were unfortunately in the positions that leaders are normally in. The 5% were willing, the 95% were willing to sit back and wait on someone else to make a move. And how do you know that? Well, take a look at how things unfolded. I think a lot of people in the Big Ten were rubbed the wrong way, not just because their season got postponed well before you probably need to make a call on it. Listen, if they had given you guidance this entire time that says very doubtful we're going to have a season, and then Kevin Warren and everyone had walked together to a podium in lockstep, arms crossed, well, I guess 6 feet apart, given the current set of circumstances, and they were to have told you, we just can't get it done. That's why we didn't release a schedule to you. We can't get it done. It would have been one thing. But alas, that's not how things went down. And so what ended up happening, and a perfect illustration of the kind of garbage that can end up occurring when you have the 595 rule in effect, is you could have a conference, you could have a league office, you could have a conference network. Not only release and promote the release of a schedule, you can have that same conference 6 days later, not even a full calendar week, look you in the eye, and not only postpone that season that they released a schedule for, but in their own words, folks, tell you that it was abundantly clear, quote unquote, that they needed to make that move. That is the 595 rule. There were 3 conferences still out there that were wise enough to think independently, and that got us over really the first hurdle, because if you think about this, what we have discussed a lot, especially over the past month, as you start to get closer to a decision date, was, is it going to be 1 domino equals 5 dominoes on the Power 5 level? Or are these conferences going to make their own decisions? Now, it was pretty widely assumed, and it came to fruition that this was the case, that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were going to be one and the same. And that's happened. The big question mark was, okay, well, if 2 of those go down, I mean, are the other 3 just inevitably going to follow? Not yet. And I do believe that while it is certainly a possibility that ultimately no one plays college football this year, I don't think those decisions will have been linked nearly as much as we previously thought they may be. So the first hurdle we have an answer to. It is not 1 domino falls, they all fall. Now, over the last couple of days, what have we been hearing? The very latest, at least from our end, is this. Those final 3, the final SEC, ACC, Big 12, the final ones standing here, they are very committed to playing a season. They are conscious of the fact that we got to continuously update our data and intel, and we got to listen to the proper experts in the room, but they are very, very committed to playing, and there is legitimate optimism in those circles. A lot of folks out there, I think, are still of the opinion, and you may well end up being right. I'm on the fence here, but I'm telling you, a lot of you are of the opinion that 2 of them already canceled. It's only a matter of time till the other 3 do. Like I said, may end up happening. What I can tell you right now, again, it is August 13th. What I can tell you is on August 13th, there is optimism that they're going to get a season off the ground. Getting it off the ground and getting it back on the ground, two different things, but they really do believe they're going to be able to get it off the ground. Now, here is the other underlying factor that, to be honest with you, I wouldn't even say it's underlying anymore. I'd say it's right there on the surface. When all this started going down, when the Big Ten announced their postponement, I tweeted out several things, but one thing that a lot of you saw me tweet out is the big question now is how many dance partners does the SEC think they need? Because I can tell you this, I don't see any world, nor does Greg Sankey, and he's gone on record as saying this, where the SEC just plays on an island. That's not happening. It may sound cool, but it's not practical. My question has been and continues to be, do they think they need one other dance partner? By dance partner, I mean other conference playing football simultaneously. Or do they need two of them? Right now, they got two of them. And there's been this talking point out there that's gotten kind of popularized, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it's gotten kind of popularized that the Big 12 holds all the cards right now. And if the Big 12 bows out, then the other two are going to have no choice but to bow out. Now, that could be one of those things that since there is precious little legitimate information out there, when someone says something, everyone just kind of latches on to it. That could be the case, or it could be that it's perfectly valid that the SEC and the ACC are depending on the Big 12 to stay in this thing, and if they don't stay in this thing, then the other two will quickly fold up shop as well. Here is the best guidance that we have. There's been the L word out there the whole time. Anyone in any group that you have spoken about this subject to, they have tried to use the word liability. They want you to know that you're thinking right here, they're thinking just a little bit higher than you are. They actually know legalese terminology. So liability, what are we talking about here? Well, essentially, you being on the hook for something terrible that happens. And that is a very obvious, legitimate fear of any kind of athletic department or program or conference. Yes, all of that's on the table. How in the world does it intertwine with the SEC needing the Big 12 and the ACC needing the SEC, and likewise? Well, here's how. We were privy to some information about how this all would work. How does liability work? If that's your worst fear, and then your worst fears are realized, some people postpone their seasons, you go ahead and play your seasons, and then the worst it happens, and you have a COVID outbreak, and kids have permanent damage because of it. Like, that's clearly worst of worst case, and you're on the hook for liability. Well, how does that really intertwine with how many conferences are playing? Well, the best information and intel that we could get is liability, it goes a long way in determining one way or the other based on whether you are maintaining the industry standard or not, or you're conforming, let's say, to the industry standard. And now, once I tell you that, now you understand why it becomes a lot more important for as many players to be at the table as possible. Conferences, when I say players. If you've got the SEC, for example, and the worst were to happen, and they were to be sitting in a courtroom several years later, and you're talking about liability, if you had the Big 12 playing, and you had the ACC playing, you had several G5s playing, then you could reasonably say, we were maintaining the industry standard. We weren't the only ones out there playing, so certainly we were right in line with what the industry standard still was at the time. However, if you were the only game in town and everyone else had closed up shop and you weren't, you understand that you'd probably get laughed at by anyone wearing a black robe. So what's the next step here? The next step is camps and classes. Those are the big C's right now, the two C's. Camps are opening all across the country, and classes are opening all across the country. Now, let me go ahead and spoil the ending for you here. There are going to be cases of outbreaks. I think it's all but inevitable that that's going to happen. I'm not necessarily even talking about in a locker room or in a team, but you're eventually going to wake up and look through one groggy eye at that iPhone one of these mornings coming up, and you're going to see a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen students at fill-in-the-blank university have tested positive for COVID. I know there have been some of those headlines out there today. My point is, that's coming. How big is it? To what degree is it managed? And secondly, does it impact the football program on said campus? And thirdly, are people prepared for it in the decision-making circles with college football? I think they are. I think with the SEC, Big 12, and ACC, I think the minds in those rooms are wise enough to understand we're not getting through this unscathed. There are going to be hiccups here. how do we deal with them? How do we overcome them? Because you can't come all this way and then say, okay, but at the first sign of trouble, after all these months and after all these protocols that have been put in place, you know, if we have a 6-hour period of some bad news that comes out, we'll just scrap it. I don't think that's going to be the approach. If you've stood this long, I think you're probably going to try and stand a little bit longer and be smart about it and weather the storm. But let me tell you what my biggest what if is. And I kind of said this the other night, and I've really kind of said this about the past month. Where everyone else has been thinking about worst case, you know, like if you are the Big Ten and you postpone and then some others don't, all you're thinking is, oh, you'll be sorry. Because, I mean, you know, we have taken precaution. You didn't. What happens if on your watch, if you're Greg Sankey, you know, if on your SEC watch, you have some breakouts and you have some bad things happen, and that's naturally where the mind goes. And I understand that. But could I please present this alternative hypothetical that we may or may not see play out one way or the other? If, let's say, the season does get off the ground and there is a lot of fighting behind the scenes, trust me, there's a lot of fighting by those who have already canceled their seasons to pressure the others to cancel their season too, because they don't want the possibility of what I'm about to say happening. The last thing in this world that Big Ten presidents and chancellors and athletic directors and conference commissioners of the Pac-12 and Big Ten, the last thing in the world they want is to have postponed their season and then us be sitting here in the third week of October, first week in November, and the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 are still playing football. And they've had some hiccups, but largely it turns out the protocols that they had in place the whole time worked. And as it turns out, you probably didn't need to postpone your season. You voluntarily did. If you think people are mad right now, and believe me, they are, what happens when your fan bases and your administrations, especially the ones who weren't on board with this decision to begin with, your head coaches, your coaching staffs, what happens when they've got their feet propped up on Saturday having to watch Alabama play against LSU, having to watch Texas play against Oklahoma, and you aren't doing anything? And as it turns out, what was told to us at one time to be abundantly clear ended up being anything but. So those are just some things to think about. That's where we are right now, and we try and bring you as much up-to-date but also sourced, logic-based information as we can, which means there are a lot of whispers out there that we don't address on this program, at least.